It was supposed to be an ordinary day for Amara. She had just finished her morning classes at the university, where she was pursuing her law degree, and decided to stop by the mall to pick out a special gift for her mother's upcoming birthday. Her mother, a woman of quiet strength and grace, had always been the cornerstone of their family. Amara wanted to find something that symbolized the love and gratitude she felt, a piece of jewelry that her mother could cherish forever. The jewelry store, Elegance Emporium, gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the high-end mall. It was the kind of place that exuded luxury, polished marble floors, gold-accented display cases, and an air of exclusivity that seemed to separate it from the world outside. Amara hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, smoothing the creases of her modest cardigan. She was no stranger to such spaces, but there was always that nagging sense of being out of place in an environment that seemed to cater to a different crowd. As she entered, the quiet hum of soft classical music was interrupted by the faint whispers of the sales staff. Two women behind the counter exchanged glances, their smiles disappearing the moment their eyes met hers. Amara noticed but brushed it off. She had grown accustomed to those subtle slights, the stares that lingered too long, the quick changes in tone. She had learned to carry herself with dignity, refusing to let such things shake her. Her eyes fell on a beautiful diamond bracelet displayed on a velvet cushion. It sparkled under the overhead lights, its intricate design reminiscent of the delicate patterns her mother loved. Amara felt a surge of excitement and approached the counter to take a closer look. She waited patiently for one of the sales associates to assist her, but neither moved. Instead, they busied themselves with meaningless tasks, pretending not to see her. After a few minutes, Amara cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, could I see that bracelet, please?" she asked, her voice polite yet firm. One of the women finally turned toward her, her expression a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. "Are you sure?" the associate asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "It's quite expensive." Amara felt the heat rise to her cheeks but maintained her composure. "Yes, I'd like to see it," she replied calmly. The associate sighed and reluctantly unlocked the display case. As she placed the bracelet on the counter, Amara reached out to admire it. The moment her fingers brushed the cool metal, a loud, accusatory voice shattered the fragile civility of the moment. "What's going on here?" barked a man who had appeared from the back office. It was Mr. Grayson, the store manager. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a sharp suit and an even sharper demeanor. His piercing eyes darted between Amara and the sales associate, who quickly stepped back, leaving Amara standing alone at the counter. "She was looking at the bracelet," the associate said, her voice tinged with false concern. Mr. Grayson's gaze narrowed as he took a step closer to Amara. "Looking, huh? Or planning to walk out with it?" he snapped. Amara was stunned. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly but still firm. "I was just..." Before she could finish, Mr. Grayson reached over and snatched the bracelet from her hands. His sudden movement startled her, and in her attempt to step back, her elbow brushed against a nearby display stand, causing a small trinket to wobble and fall to the floor. "That's enough!" Mr. Grayson roared, his voice echoing through the store. "I've seen your type before. Always looking for something you can't afford, thinking you can just take what you want." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Around her, other shoppers had stopped to watch the unfolding scene. Some pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation, while others whispered among themselves. The air was thick with tension. "Sir, I haven't done anything wrong," Amara said, her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. "You're making a mistake." "A mistake?" Mr. Grayson sneered. "You're lucky I don't call security right now." And then, without warning, he reached out and shoved her shoulder, forcing her to stumble backward. The crowd gasped, and someone yelled, "Hey! That's not okay." Amara's vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she stared at Mr. Grayson, his face twisted with unwarranted anger. She could feel the weight of every eye in the store on her, the judgment and pity mingling in their gazes. "Call security," Mr. Grayson ordered one of the sales associates, who hesitated before reaching for the phone. Amara took a deep breath and straightened her posture. "Go ahead," she said, her voice calm but filled with quiet defiance. "Call them. I have nothing to hide." Before anyone could move, a voice from the crowd called out, "I'm recording this. Everyone's going to see how you treat people in this store." Mr. Grayson froze for a moment, his eyes flickering toward the person holding their phone. His expression wavered, but his arrogance quickly returned. "Let them see," he said. "We have nothing to hide either." Amara reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, dialing a number with trembling fingers. When the call connected, she spoke with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "Dad," she said, "I need you to come to Elegance Emporium. Something's happened." The mention of her father seemed insignificant to Mr. Grayson, who crossed his arms and smirked. "What's he going to do? Lecture me on store policy?" Amara didn't respond. She simply locked eyes with him, her gaze unwavering. Deep down, she knew this moment was far from over. Amara's heart pounded as she ended the call, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Around her, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, their whispered conversations buzzing with outrage and curiosity. Some stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or walk away, while others discreetly continued recording. The sales associates exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier smugness replaced by a flicker of doubt. But Mr. Grayson remained steadfast in his arrogance, pacing behind the counter like a predator guarding its territory. Amara took a moment to steady herself, inhaling deeply and exhaling slowly. She was determined not to let them see her break. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about standing up against something far bigger, something that had lingered in the shadows of her life for far too long. As the minutes crawled by, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Amara felt the weight of every second as she waited for her father to arrive. Mr. Grayson leaned against the counter, glaring at her with a self-satisfied smirk, clearly confident that he held all the power in the situation. "Still waiting on Daddy," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let me guess, he's going to come in here, puff out his chest, and try to bully us? Newsflash, sweetheart, that's not how it works here." Amara didn't respond, but she held his gaze, refusing to let him intimidate her. She could feel her pulse in her ears, each beat a reminder to stay calm, to focus on what mattered. She thought of her father, how he had always taught her to stand tall in the face of adversity, to never let the ignorance of others define her worth. His words echoed in her mind now, grounding her. The crowd began to shift, their murmurs quieting as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Amara turned toward the entrance just as her father, Mr. Cole, walked into the store. He was a man of quiet authority, his presence commanding attention without needing to raise his voice. Dressed in a tailored suit, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with a mixture of concern and determination. Mr. Grayson straightened up, his smirk faltering for the first time. He seemed momentarily taken aback by Mr. Cole's imposing figure but quickly masked it with a dismissive chuckle. "Ah, you must be the father," he said, his tone mockingly polite. "I'm glad you're here. Maybe you can teach your daughter some respect for other people's property." Mr. Cole ignored him and walked straight to Amara, his gaze softening as he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Amara nodded, though her hands still trembled slightly. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But they accused me of stealing and, he hit me." Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and her father's jaw tightened. Mr. Cole turned to Mr. Grayson, his calm demeanor now edged with a cold intensity. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice deceptively even. Did you put your hands on my daughter? Mr. Grayson shrugged, his arrogance returning. Your daughter was causing a scene, he said dismissively. She was handling merchandise she had no intention of buying, and she knocked over one of our displays. I had every right to act as I did. You had every right to assault her? Mr. Cole's voice sharpened, cutting through the air like a blade. To humiliate her in front of a crowd based on nothing more than your own prejudice? Mr. Grayson scoffed. Prejudice? Don't play the race card with me. This is about behavior, not skin color. The crowd gasped audibly, the tension in the room reaching a boiling point. Mr. Cole stepped closer to the counter, his towering presence forcing Mr. Grayson to lean back slightly. I don't think you understand the gravity of what you've done, Mr. Cole said, his voice steady but laced with quiet fury. You've not only insulted and assaulted my daughter, but you've also shown the world the kind of establishment this store truly is. Mr. Grayson laughed nervously, glancing around at the growing crowd. Look, I don't know who you think you are, but I run this store. If you have a problem with how I handled the situation, you can take it up with corporate. Mr. Cole raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a slight, humorless smile. Oh, I plan to, he said. Then, turning to the sales associates, he added, and while I'm here, I'd like to speak with the owner. The associates exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure of how to respond. Mr. Grayson crossed his arms, his confidence faltering for the first time. You're looking at him, he said. I run this place. Mr. Cole's smile widened, though it didn't reach his eyes. You manage this place, he corrected. I own it. The room fell into stunned silence. Even the faint hum of the classical music seemed to fade as the weight of Mr. Cole's words sank in. Mr. Grayson's face turned ashen, his bravado crumbling as he realized the full extent of his mistake. The sales associates froze, their eyes darting between Mr. Cole and Mr. Grayson, unsure of what to do or say. You're the owner? Mr. Grayson stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Mr. Cole said, his tone firm and unyielding. And as of this moment, you're no longer employed here. The crowd erupted into murmurs, some cheering quietly, others simply watching in stunned disbelief. Amara felt a surge of relief and pride as she watched her father take control of the situation. But this wasn't just about her, it was about holding people accountable, about setting an example for others who might face similar injustices. As Mr. Cole signaled for the lawyer who had accompanied him, Amara stood by his side, her confidence growing with each passing moment. The store was no longer a place of humiliation and fear. It was a place of reckoning, a turning point not just for her but for everyone watching. And she knew that this was only the beginning. The crowd outside the store swelled as word of the confrontation spread through the mall. Shoppers paused mid-stroll, curious onlookers pressed against the glass storefront, and a cacophony of voices murmured speculation about what had just happened. Inside, the tension was thick, the air charged with the weight of the moment. Amara stood tall beside her father, her earlier feelings of helplessness replaced by a simmering determination. This was no longer just about a personal slight, it had become a reckoning for the blatant injustice she had endured. Mr. Grayson stood frozen, his face pale, the full weight of Mr. Cole's words settling over him like a heavy fog. He stammered, struggling to find a foothold of authority in the situation. There's been a misunderstanding, he said weakly, his earlier bravado evaporated. I wasn't aware that she was connected to you. Mr. Cole's gaze was as cold as steel. Connected to me, he repeated, his voice low but filled with an unmistakable intensity. You think this is about who she's connected to? This is about your actions, your assumptions, and your utter lack of respect for another human being. My daughter's worth, her integrity, does not depend on her connection to anyone, least of all me. Amara felt her chest tighten, the powerful words resonating deeply within her. For so long, she had fought to prove her worth in spaces where she was constantly underestimated. To hear her father articulate the truth so plainly was both empowering and deeply moving. "Mr. Cole," Mr. Grayson began, his voice shaky, "please, I didn't mean to offend anyone. I was simply following protocol." "Protocol?" Mr. Cole's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stepped closer, his towering frame making Mr. Grayson visibly shrink. "Tell me, Mr. Grayson, is it protocol to accuse a paying customer of theft without evidence? Is it protocol to lay your hands on someone simply because they make you uncomfortable? Or perhaps it's protocol to assume guilt based on the color of their skin?" The room fell silent. Even the murmuring crowd outside seemed to quiet, as if the weight of Mr. Cole's words had seeped through the walls. The sales associates stood rooted in place, their faces masks of fear and shame. Amara could see their discomfort, but she felt no sympathy. They had stood by, complicit, as their manager humiliated her. Their silence had been as damning as Mr. Grayson's actions. One of the associates, a young woman with trembling hands, finally spoke up. "Mr. Cole, I didn't know she was your daughter. If we had known, you would have treated her with respect?" Mr. Cole interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "And what about the countless others who walk through those doors every day, trusting that they will be treated fairly? Do they deserve less respect because they don't have connections or wealth? Because they don't look like the kind of people you think belong here?" The young woman fell silent, her head bowed in shame. Mr. Cole turned his attention back to Mr. Grayson, his expression unreadable. "You've not only failed my daughter," he said, "you've failed this business, this brand, and the values it's supposed to represent. As the manager, you were entrusted with more than just numbers and profits. You were supposed to lead with integrity, to set a standard for your staff. Instead, you've tarnished this store's reputation and violated the trust of your customers." Mr. Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but Mr. Cole held up a hand to silence him. "Save your excuses," he said firmly. "You will leave this store immediately. Security will escort you out, and you will not return." As if on cue, 2 mall security guards stepped into the store, their presence a silent testament to the gravity of the situation. Mr. Grayson looked around helplessly, his eyes darting to the sales associates as if hoping for someone to come to his defense. But no one moved. His shoulders slumped in defeat as the guard stepped forward, motioning for him to follow. As Mr. Grayson was led out of the store, the crowd outside erupted into a mix of cheers and applause. Amara watched him go, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. There was satisfaction in seeing justice served, but also a lingering sadness that such a confrontation had been necessary in the first place. Mr. Cole turned to the remaining staff, his expression softening slightly but retaining its authoritative edge. "This store will be closed for the remainder of the day," he announced. "All employees are to report to a mandatory meeting tomorrow morning, where we will discuss new policies and training. If anyone feels they cannot meet the standards of respect and integrity that this business demands, they are welcome to resign before then." The associates nodded silently, their faces pale. Mr. Cole then turned to Amara, his stern expression softening into one of concern. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Amara nodded, though she felt the emotional weight of the ordeal beginning to settle over her. "I'll be fine," she said. "But this can't be the end of it. People need to know what happened here. They need to know that this kind of behavior isn't acceptable." Mr. Cole smiled faintly, pride evident in his eyes. "You're absolutely right," he said. "This isn't just about today. It's about creating change, not just in this store, but in the way people think and treat one another. And it starts here, with us." Outside, the crowd began to disperse, the energy in the mall shifting as people returned to their routines. But for Amara, nothing would be the same. She knew that this moment would stay with her, shaping the way she approached the world and the battles she chose to fight. And as she walked out of the store beside her father, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to use her voice, her experiences, and her resilience to make a difference. As Amara and her father left the jewelry store, the emotions swirling within her were complex and overwhelming. Relief, vindication, and a lingering sting of humiliation all battled for dominance in her mind. The crowd outside parted to let them pass, many onlookers offering her encouraging smiles or quiet words of support. While she appreciated their kindness, she couldn't shake the feeling that it had taken something extraordinary, a public spectacle, her father's intervention, and the revelation of his ownership, for people to truly see her, to believe her. They walked to a quieter corner of the mall, away from the prying eyes of strangers. Mr. Cole placed a hand on Amara's shoulder, his expression soft but searching. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked gently. Amara hesitated. She had always admired her father's calm strength, the way he carried himself with dignity no matter the situation. But now, for the first time, she felt a crack in her armor. "It's just," her voice faltered, and she looked down, ashamed of the tears threatening to spill. "I'm so tired of having to prove myself. Everywhere I go, I have to fight to be seen, to be respected. And today. Her words broke off, a sob escaping before she could stop it. Mr. Cole pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and steady around her. "I know," he said quietly. "I know it's exhausting. And it's not fair. But you stood your ground today, Amara. You didn't let them break you. That takes a kind of strength most people don't even realize they have." Amara clung to him for a moment, drawing comfort from his presence. But even as her tears subsided, a fire began to kindle in her chest. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with determined eyes. "It's not enough, though," she said. "What happens to people who don't have someone like you to back them up? What about the people who are dismissed or silenced because they don't have the power to fight back?" Her father nodded, a small, proud smile touching his lips. "That's the question, isn't it?" he said. "And it's one that doesn't have a simple answer. But if today taught us anything, it's that change starts with action. Speaking out. Standing up. And holding people accountable." As they continued their conversation, the mall grew quieter, the evening crowd beginning to thin. Amara's thoughts raced, fueled by a mixture of frustration and resolve. She couldn't let this experience end here. There had to be a way to take this moment and turn it into something bigger, something meaningful. The next day, Amara awoke early, her mind already buzzing with ideas. She sat at her desk, a notebook open in front of her, and began to outline her thoughts. She wrote about her experience at the store, the emotions she had felt, and the injustice she had faced. But she also wrote about the larger picture, the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to persist, the need for education and awareness, and the power of collective action. By the time her father called her for breakfast, Amara had the beginnings of a plan. Over coffee and toast, she shared her vision with him, a campaign to promote diversity, inclusion, and accountability within businesses. "It's not just about that store," she explained. "It's about setting a standard. If businesses know that their customers are watching, that their employees are being held to a higher level of accountability, maybe they'll think twice before allowing this kind of behavior to continue." Mr. Cole listened intently, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "It's ambitious," he said. "But it's also exactly what's needed. And you're the perfect person to lead it." With her father's support, Amara began reaching out to people in her community, activists, business owners, educators, and anyone else who might be willing to join her cause. She shared her story openly, using it as a catalyst to spark conversations about bias and discrimination. She was amazed at the response. People from all walks of life reached out to share their own experiences, their support, and their ideas. One of the first major steps was organizing a community forum, where people could come together to discuss their concerns and brainstorm solutions. The event was held in a local community center, and the turnout exceeded all expectations. Amara stood at the front of the room, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her as she faced the crowd. But as she began to speak, the words flowed naturally, her passion guiding her. She talked about the jewelry store incident, but also about the countless smaller moments that had shaped her understanding of the world, the casual comments, the subtle exclusions, the times she had been overlooked or underestimated. "These experiences aren't just mine," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "They're happening to people every day, in every corner of our society. And if we don't acknowledge them, if we don't confront them, nothing will ever change." The room erupted in applause, and Amara felt a swell of pride and hope. For the first time, she truly believed that her voice could make a difference, that her actions could inspire others to join the fight for a more just and equitable world. Over the next few weeks, the campaign gained momentum. Social media buzzed with stories and testimonials from people who had experienced similar injustices. Businesses began to take notice, with some reaching out to Amara for advice on how to implement better training and policies. Even the jewelry store, now under new management, announced a comprehensive review of its practices and pledged to do better. Through it all, Amara remained grounded, her focus unwavering. She knew that change wouldn't come overnight, but she also knew that every step forward mattered. And as she looked back on that fateful day at the mall, she realized that what had once been a moment of pain and humiliation had become a catalyst for something far greater, a movement that was bigger than herself, bigger than any single incident. She was no longer just a young woman who had been wronged. She was a leader, a changemaker, and a voice for those who had been silenced. Amara's campaign grew beyond anything she had imagined. What started as a local initiative soon attracted attention on a national scale. Media outlets picked up her story, intrigued by the young woman who turned a moment of humiliation into a powerful movement. She was invited to speak on talk shows, write op-eds, and even participate in panel discussions about systemic discrimination and the importance of accountability in businesses. Her father, ever her steadfast supporter, stood by her side as she navigated this new chapter. Together, they shared their experiences, offering a dual perspective that resonated deeply with audiences. Mr. Cole often spoke about his role as a father and business owner, emphasizing the responsibility leaders have to create environments where everyone feels valued. Amara, on the other hand, brought a personal and impassioned perspective, sharing her journey and urging others to stand up against injustice in their own communities. Despite her growing platform, Amara remained deeply committed to grassroots efforts. She continued hosting community forums, organizing workshops, and working with local businesses to implement the changes she championed. One of her most significant initiatives was a mentorship program that paired young professionals from marginalized communities with seasoned mentors in various industries. The goal was to provide guidance, build confidence, and break down the barriers that often kept talented individuals from reaching their full potential. One day, while reviewing applications for the mentorship program, Amara came across a name that stopped her in her tracks: Sarah Coleman. The name belonged to the young sales associate who had spoken up during the incident at the jewelry store. Curious, Amara read through Sarah's application. In it, Sarah detailed her own struggles as a woman trying to establish herself in a competitive industry, as well as the guilt she carried from witnessing Amara's mistreatment and not doing enough to stop it. She wrote about how the incident had been a wake-up call, inspiring her to reflect on her own biases and privileges. Moved by Sarah's honesty, Amara decided to reach out. They met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, and though there was an initial awkwardness, their conversation quickly became open and honest. Sarah apologized profusely for her inaction that day, explaining how fear of losing her job had paralyzed her. Amara, while understanding, gently challenged Sarah to think about the cost of silence, not just for herself, but for those who suffer because of it. By the end of their meeting, they had found common ground. Sarah expressed a strong desire to be part of the solution, and Amara welcomed her into the mentorship program as both a mentee and an advocate. Their collaboration became a powerful example of how confronting uncomfortable truths could lead to growth and change. Meanwhile, Amara's work began to influence larger organizations. Corporations invited her to speak at diversity and inclusion seminars, and some even sought her input on revamping their training programs. At one such seminar, she met Dr. Eliza Monroe, a renowned sociologist and activist. Dr. Monroe had been following Amara's progress and was impressed by her ability to balance passion with practical solutions. She proposed a partnership, a nationwide initiative to promote workplace equity, combining Amara's grassroots approach with Dr. Monroe's academic expertise. The partnership was a game-changer. Together, they developed a comprehensive toolkit for businesses, complete with workshops, policy templates, and resources for fostering inclusive environments. The initiative, called Empower Equity, launched with a series of events across the country, each one drawing hundreds of participants eager to learn and contribute. Despite her growing responsibilities, Amara made it a point to stay connected to the people and places that had shaped her. She frequently visited the jewelry store, now under a new manager who had fully embraced the changes she and her father had advocated for. The store became a model for others, implementing rigorous training programs and adopting a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. More than that, it became a symbol of transformation, proof that change was possible with the right leadership and accountability. One afternoon, during one of her visits, Amara noticed a young girl nervously browsing the displays. She recognized the familiar look of uncertainty in the girl's eyes, the same look she had once carried. Approaching with a warm smile, Amara struck up a conversation. The girl, whose name was Lena, shared that she was shopping for a gift for her mother but felt out of place in such an upscale store. Amara knelt to meet Lena's gaze, her voice kind but firm. "You belong here just as much as anyone else," she said. "Never let anyone make you feel otherwise." Lena's face lit up with a shy smile, and Amara helped her choose a beautiful necklace. As Lena left, Amara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. It was moments like these, small but meaningful, that reminded her why she had started this journey. Over time, the jewelry store incident became a distant memory, but its impact continued to ripple through Amara's life and the lives of others. Her work inspired countless people to challenge injustice in their own spheres, creating a network of advocates committed to making the world a fairer place. And though she had achieved so much, Amara knew her mission was far from over. Each step forward only illuminated how much further there was to go. As she reflected on everything that had transpired, Amara felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the pain or humiliation she had endured, but for the strength it had given her to fight for something greater. She had turned a moment of vulnerability into a movement of empowerment, proving that even the darkest experiences could be a source of light and hope. And as she prepared for the next chapter of her journey, she carried with her the unwavering belief that change, though difficult, was always worth fighting for. Months turned into years, and Amara's life became a tapestry of advocacy, leadership, and personal growth. Her journey had taken her from being a young woman humiliated in a jewelry store to a beacon of hope and change for countless others. Yet, with success came its own set of challenges, as she discovered that sustaining momentum in a movement was as demanding as igniting it. The mentorship program flourished, with hundreds of participants finding support and guidance through its structure. Success stories poured in, individuals landing dream jobs, breaking barriers in their fields, and, most importantly, finding their voices. Amara received letters and emails daily, each one a testament to the program's impact. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from an older man named Henry, who had worked in retail for over 3 decades. Henry shared how witnessing Amara's fight had inspired him to confront his own prejudices and advocate for his younger colleagues. "I never thought someone like me could change," he wrote, "but your story made me see that it's never too late to be better." Amara kept the letter on her desk as a reminder of why she had started her journey. Her partnership with Dr. Monroe continued to grow, and together they tackled larger systemic issues. They worked with lawmakers to propose legislation aimed at holding businesses accountable for discriminatory practices. Though progress was slow and met with resistance, Amara's determination never wavered. Each small victory, whether it was passing a new policy or changing the culture of a single company, felt monumental in its own right. Amara also began hosting an annual summit called Voices for Change. The event brought together activists, business leaders, and everyday people committed to fostering equity and inclusion. At the third annual summit, Amara gave a speech that would go on to define her legacy. Standing before a crowd of thousands, she spoke about the power of community and the importance of collective action. "None of us can do this alone," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Change isn't about one person or one moment. It's about all of us, standing together, refusing to accept anything less than justice and fairness. It's about turning pain into purpose and using our voices to lift each other up." The speech went viral, resonating with people across the globe. Messages of support flooded in, but so did criticism from those who resisted change. Amara faced backlash, particularly on social media, where trolls and detractors sought to undermine her work. While their words stung, Amara leaned on her father and her closest supporters to stay grounded. She reminded herself that progress often comes with pushback and that the fight for equity was never meant to be easy. In the midst of her advocacy work, Amara also found time to focus on her personal life. She reconnected with old friends and made new ones, building a circle of people who supported her unconditionally. One of those connections blossomed into something deeper, a relationship with a fellow activist named Malik, whose passion for justice matched her own. Malik became not just a partner in life but a collaborator in her work, offering new perspectives and helping her navigate the complexities of her growing platform. As the years passed, Amara began to think about the future of her movement. She wanted to ensure that the work she had started would continue long after she was gone. To that end, she founded the Amara Cole Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting equity, mentorship, and advocacy on a global scale. The foundation's programs ranged from providing scholarships to young leaders to funding initiatives that addressed systemic discrimination in various industries. One of the foundation's flagship projects was a documentary series titled Stories of Change. The series featured individuals from diverse backgrounds sharing their experiences of overcoming adversity and fighting for justice. Amara herself appeared in the first episode, recounting the day at the jewelry store that had changed her life forever. The series quickly gained a following, sparking conversations and inspiring viewers to take action in their own communities. In her quieter moments, Amara often returned to the jewelry store, now a thriving business known for its inclusive practices and welcoming atmosphere. The staff, many of whom had joined after the management overhaul, greeted her warmly each time she visited. One day, as she browsed the displays, a young woman approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you Amara Cole?" Amara smiled. "Yes, that's me." The woman introduced herself as Tasha and explained that she had recently been hired at the store. "I just wanted to thank you," Tasha said. "I heard about what happened here years ago, and it gave me the courage to apply for this job. I didn't think I'd belong in a place like this, but knowing what you've done, it made me believe I could." Tears welled in Amara's eyes as she hugged Tasha. Moments like this reminded her that even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she might never fully understand. As Amara reflected on her journey, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the successes but for the challenges that had shaped her. She thought about her father, whose quiet strength had been her anchor, Sarah, whose willingness to grow had become a symbol of redemption, and the countless others who had joined her in the fight for a better world. Amara's story was far from over. There were still battles to be fought, voices to be amplified, and systems to be changed. But as she stood on the foundation she had built, surrounded by a community of allies and advocates, she knew one thing for certain: the movement she had started was unstoppable. Together, they would continue to challenge the status quo, push boundaries, and create a future where everyone, regardless of race, background, or circumstance, could stand with dignity and pride. And so, with her heart full of hope and her vision clearer than ever, Amara stepped forward, ready to write the next chapter of her story, a story not just of one person, but of a collective fight for justice that would echo for generations to come.